that, we go to our good friend Barry Davis. That, of course, last night once again from the ACC. Barry, how you doing this morning?
Hey, Mike. Just I'll tell you, still trying to process everything, and it's been a crazy 48 hours. And I've been pretty much nonstop busy talking about Roy Halladay, either doing interviews like this one or having people on my show. And maybe that's why I haven't had a chance to let it all sink in, and maybe that's a good thing because it's still a little bit surreal to really, put the reality to it.
It's a difficult situation in that I think that, when a loss of life happens, I mean, it's tragic nonetheless, especially at the age of 40. But when you're a pitcher of his stature, a quote-unquote celebrity, it gets that much bigger. But I think for people in that community in Florida, you saw from Pasco County, the sheriff had a tough time getting through the press conference. It just goes back to, I guess, really how people felt about him. And so we hear things about hardworking, we hear things about humility, and we hear things about being a great family man. So when you talked to him, when was that? July? Was that the last time you talked to him?
Yeah, when he was in town to go into the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame.
So to you, and let's just say that this tragedy doesn't happen. What are the kinds of words? What are the adjectives you use for Roy Halladay?
Well, there were a lot of interesting words, and the funny thing is, Mike, in the weeks, probably months prior to this happening, whenever I'd have a former Blue Jay pitcher on my show, I'd always ask him about Roy Halladay. I'd always ask him, what can you say about Roy? And they always talked about just how focused he was, how determined he was, how dedicated he was to being the best at what he could do. He was always the first one to arrive at the ballpark. He was always the last one to leave. And that started in spring training. He would be the first one at the spring training facility long before anybody had to report. He was that locked into what he did. And guys would come there thinking that they had a pretty good regimen. They knew what was going on. They knew what they had to do to play at the highest level. And then they'd watch Roy, and they'd watch his routine every day, and they went, oh, okay, I guess I'm not even close to what I think I need to be. So there was so much of that going on. And, yes, he could be very intimidating to people that didn't know him, including some of his teammates. There were guys that, were literally afraid to approach him because they didn't know what they were going to get in return. But once people got to know him and they understood that he had very particular rules about when he is in his zone, when he's in his workplace, he needs to be left alone. And a lot of times that goes for catchers as well. I mean, most catchers will tell you that they've caught Roy Halladay. You do not walk to the mound in the middle of the game unless there's a really good reason for you to go out there. So that's just the way Roy was.
It's funny you say that, Barry, and good to talk to you this morning. Thanks for joining us. The intimidation part about Roy Halladay, it wasn't like he was this mean, bear-like figure, like a wrestler you wouldn't want to approach. He just had that stare, and I remember covering him as well. And the first couple times, meeting him, when you talk to a new player or a player that you're covering for a first time, you kind of get a read on how you're going to handle him in the future. And with Roy, I don't know if you felt the same way for the first couple of interviews with him. I couldn't get a read on him. I don't know if he was mad or if he was just focused on just answering the questions and moving on. But it's almost like just like when he was on the mound, Barry, he would look through batters. He would look at what he was actually focused on, and I almost felt that way as a member of the media talking to him for the first couple times. And you got to be careful with what you say because you're almost scared you're saying the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Well, I can remember how many post-game, scrums where, Roy would have been the pitcher that started that game, and everyone would be gathered around him at his locker, and whoever was in media relations would say, okay, go ahead. And it'd be, who's going to ask the first question? Who's going to ask the first question? So there was always that. And I want to share a story with you guys that I've talked about a little bit over the last couple of days. And to me, this really goes to show what Roy was like as far as dealing with him, even as a member of the media. And this goes back to the spring of 2009. It was his last year as a Toronto Blue Jay, and we knew that it was likely going to be his last year. So I was at Sportsnet, and we had arranged to do a feature sit-down interview with him that day. Now, I was under the impression we were going to do it at the end of the workout, so I figured, okay, I've got time, but I'm going to get to the ballpark really early and get set up, because if Roy Halladay happens to say at 8:30 in the morning, hey, you know what, I've got a couple minutes, let's do it now, I want to be ready and not miss my spot. So we were all set up really early in the morning, ready to go. And around 8:15, I see him walking across the back of one of the fields heading towards the clubhouse. And I thought, oh, maybe he's finished his workout early. So as he walked past me, I said, good morning, Doc. And he kind of looked up at me and just kept walking. And I said, hey, are we still on for? And he cut me off, turned around, looked at me and said, excuse me, I'm working. And he walked away. And I thought, oh, God, there goes my interview. It's not going to happen now. But I said, okay, you know what? I'll wait it out. And most of the players were gone by 11, 11:30. There was a couple guys left. And meanwhile, here it is, 2 o'clock. And I said to my camera guy, okay, we'll give it till 2:30. If he's not here by then, I'm going to assume he went out a back door, or he's just not going to do it.
Yeah.
So maybe around 2:20, I see his head poke out of the clubhouse door. He looks at me, he says, are you ready to do this? I went, oh, okay, let's get the cameras rolling. And I said, I'm sorry for what happened. I wasn't sure if you were still going to do the interview. And he said, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, because I bothered you on the field today, I must have ticked you off. He goes, oh, don't worry about that. He goes, I'm really sorry about that. You have to just understand that, when I'm on a field, that's my workspace, and I can't be bothered. And then he sat down with me and gave me just an amazing interview. And I realized at that time, okay, I get it now. That's how you deal with Roy Halladay.
It's wiring, Barry. As you know, you've dealt with a lot of different kinds of athletes, and they all work slightly different, and you have to understand that wiring in order to make it work, which is why I think the job that you have in doing that, and it's a difficult job, because you have to figure out, and Dave's done it for I don't know how many sports, but you've done it for both baseball and hockey. You have to understand the animal that you're dealing with and how that wiring works in order to have a relationship. Otherwise, you get those awkward scenarios where some of these guys who cover the team, beat writers, they don't want to talk to you. They just because either you haven't figured it out, or they're just the type of person that doesn't want you to figure it out. And I would think that's a very difficult job. But at the end of the day, you look back at what he's done, obviously here in Toronto, but what he went on with the Phillies. If we're looking at in terms, and I know it's a discussion in terms of best pitchers that we've had on this team, very often that Dave Stieb name is obviously going to come up. But I look at the guys who Dave Stieb played with, the surrounding support staff. If we take that into account, who is the best pitcher the Blue Jays ever had?
In my mind, and again, I'm not just saying this because of the tragic events, but I've always been the believer that Roy Halladay was that guy, because he was the lone bright spot on a terrible team year after year after year. They would lose, 4 games in a row, but you always knew that they wouldn't lose 5 in a row, because, Doc is starting today, so, the losing streak is going to end here today. And he did it with such consistency, and he did it also knowing that after a hugely successful debut to his career, where he came within 1 out of a no-hitter in his second major league start, he struggled miserably. He got sent down to low A ball. They completely rebuilt him as a pitcher, and he came back and did what he did. And of course, we look at the most success he ever had was when he left the Jays, become a member of the Phillies. But just to get a grip on how much he was loved here in this city and really in the country, guys, he asked to be traded from the Toronto Blue Jays. Okay, Vince Carter asked to be traded from the Toronto Raptors, and we've seen hockey players being asked to be traded. When they come back, they hear it. There might be a few cheers, but everyone understood, and they completely backed Roy Halladay with, yeah, you know what, you deserve to play for a winner. And when he came back to Toronto, I swear that there was not a single boo. Every person in that sold-out Rogers Center were on their feet, giving him a standing ovation. I remember that the first game back, he didn't start the game, but he went and handed the lineup card to the umpire for the Phillies, and the place went absolutely nuts. You don't see that. You do not see a guy that wanted to be traded come back with his new team and get received the way he did.
Barry, I hate to bring this up because of what's happened in the last couple of days, but what goes through your mind when you hear some of the garbage that has come out of the Boston radio station, which I will not acknowledge right now? I will not acknowledge who the hosts are, but I'm sure people out there listening to the show, watching the show, know of this because they have made a mark in a very negative way. What kind of garbage, what goes through your mind when you hear this sort of garbage going on, especially with what happened in the last 48 hours?
Well, my first thought is no one ever deserves to die. You never say that a person deserves the fate they got. Listen, we all get into our cars every day, and we assume probably a higher risk in our cars than Roy Halladay did in that plane. We don't know all the details. We have no idea exactly what was happening. And from what I have read, those planes are meant to fly very low above the water. That's exactly what they do. We don't know the details. There was no Mayday call or 911. There's no voice box in the plane. I mean, for all we know, something could have happened to him in the plane. He could have had a heart attack in the plane. You don't know, right? So for anyone to go on and say such like nasty things and basically just to get attention and the attention he's been getting. I mean, look how many times people have reposted the crap that these guys said, and it's disgusting. You know what I mean? Like, listen, I'm all for some good jokes and sometimes poor taste jokes and having fun, but my God, I mean, there's two teenage boys that just lost their father, and this guy saying he deserved what he got. I mean, it's.
Well, it's trying to make a name for themselves, and that by definition is what a shock jock does. And it's one man's opinion against probably I don't know how much that would be against it, but it's also the timing, and it's about a sense of decorum, in which he has none of that. And I just think that when you start using words, as you said, like someone deserves to die, you're just trying to make a name for yourselves. And as Dave said, you don't even really acknowledge who that person was at the station they were at. I'm just want to go a little further, though, in terms of you knowing his family situation a little bit. Now we know, there's his wife, and he's got two boys that I think they're, as you said, they're both teenaged guys, probably 8th, 9th grade in there somewhere, probably. Losing their father like that, knowing the kind of great family man and dad that he was, I can only imagine how difficult. And I asked Warren Saku about this I guess it was yesterday, Dave, about that Hall of Fame induction. I think of all the things that are usually magical about that time. In Cooperstown, I think it's going to be, that's a rough day, and I just don't know how they're going to get through it, because that's going to be tough for everybody.
It is really going to be tough, and I asked Roy about it when I had him on this summer. I mean, first of all, he was absolutely floored and blown away by being nominated in the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, because this was always his second home. He never left because he didn't like Toronto. He left because he wanted to win a championship. So. The Hall of Fame was something he knew that he wasn't going to be on the ballot until 2019, but he was really excited about, the prospect of going there. I would imagine he would put on a Blue Jay cap for that. But for his family now, and like I said, when they were here in the summer, they turned it into a family vacation. And, I had a chance to speak to his older son, Braden, and the way he spoke of his dad then, like his dad was his hero. And I have a teenage son myself, and teenage boys don't refer to their dads as heroes. Maybe they do when they get older, but as teenagers, dads are awkward. So the fact that he thought that way about his dad really tells you just what he was.
Well, I have to admit, my friend, you've had kind of rough couple of months here between your relevance to the Blue Jays and those players, including Doc Halladay. You were also talking about Tom Petty. We didn't get a chance to talk about that. And, of course, We Ain't Petty is the name of your band. You still continue to do gigs. In fact, how many days after did you have that first gig after Tom passed? It was pretty quick.
Oh, man. You know what? We booked the gig the day before he died, as crazy as that was. And it was probably just 7 or 8 days after he passed away, we did our first show, and it was tough. And I've had people come up to me over the last 24 hours and say, how can all these people that never met Roy Halladay be so sad and so shocked and so depressed? I don't get it. They don't even know him. And it finally, it clicked into me, and it was, what? I know exactly how they feel, because that's the way I felt about Tom Petty. I never met Tom Petty, but I always felt like I knew him, because so much of my time, so much of, days when I was not feeling great, Tom Petty was the thing that would kind of cheer me up and make me feel like the world is right. Baseball fans, sports fans in general, I mean, man, they set their lives to watching that game. They buy tickets, they buy posters, they buy bobbleheads, because, these are their heroes. And even though they've never met him personally, they see him they follow the career, and in many ways they do feel like they've known him. So for people that have never met him personally, I totally can understand how they feel like they've lost a friend or a loved one.
Well, it's that emotional connection, Barry, and that's what makes those people very special. And hey, thank you so much for joining us. By the way, if you can send me the link on that messenger doodad, whatever you call that.
Yes.
Now I'm sounding like old Stephen Rapp.
Yeah, you do sound like old Stephen Rapp.
Send me the link.
You don't do the Twitter?
Yeah,
because I can send it to you on the
I
Twitter.
I can do the tweets. You have the twatter? I'll send you something on twatter. Send me.
You know what they say about the internet? It's a fad.
yeah. The whole highway. Where's the highway?
It's a fad.
Send me the
What
link.
you're saying you'd like a link for the tribute show that we did?
Yes, that and the actual. Now you're sending out the Out of the Park with the show you did with Roy.
I have that, and also I just did a tribute show that went up last night.
Oh, okay.
Where we talked to a number of his teammates. Casey Jansen, Jesse Litch, Ricky Romero, and Buck Martinez all talked and shared their memories of him.
Well,
we also had a little bit of the interview I did with Roy as well.
Okay, send me that because I want to tweet that out because obviously you're a good friend and you do a great job with Maddie as well. So we want to get out there today. And thanks so much for joining us, my friend. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Barry.
That is Barry Davis, our good friend. His podcast is called Out of the Park, and you will be able to hear later on today, those conversations that he had with Roy Halladay.
What? We just become best friends? Yep.